August 4th, 1989. I first met the astronaut after a half-year mission on the Russian space station. He had gone through his preliminary post-landing physical but complained about pain in his jaw and gums. His health, aside from those complaints, was fair. It was my job to find out what was wrong with him before moving him on to the next specialist. The urologist, I think. The order always changes. The patient was in decent spirits when we met, although I could tell something was on his mind. We chatted for a small while. It turned out he'd been working on the Feng Li discovery. My heart sank. When Feng and Li discovered what they initially called the Venus Tictacs in 1982, no one in the know was surprised. Just another alien organism to add to the list of hundreds. A team was formed to conduct research and determine its risks and benefits, and there were no expectations that anything would come of it. Well, as is so often the case, those in the know knew nothing. Given those Venus Tic-Tacs an electric shock in the right place for the right amount of time, and what do you get? Pluripotent stem cells. They had the potential to be a game-changer in the field of regenerative medicine. I don't think anyone expected to discover them when we did. All the data we had showed we were at least a decade away from inducing pluripotency. Hell, we assumed civilian doctors might figure them out first. This was big. Capital B. In dentistry, it meant we might be able to regrow missing teeth and reverse jaw deterioration. I followed the studies with great interest. The animal tests were successful. New teeth, better jaws, nice smiles all around. Success, good, great. The researchers moved on to human subjects. Failure. Nothing. Zilch. No reason. No goddamn reason whatsoever. No one could figure out why there was a 100% success rate with animal subjects and a 0% success rate with people. The cells wouldn't grow at all. Then a doctor named Franco, who'd been on the team since the beginning, suggested they try using the Tic-Tac cells on people in space. He didn't even give a reason. I don't think he had one. It was something along the lines of, fuck it, it doesn't work here, let's try it up there. So we did. And it worked. In a way. The effects were different from everyone. Sometimes cavities were repaired. Sometimes jawbones grew again, then again. Sometimes teeth fell out and jaws collapsed. That's what happened to an astronaut named Jose. No one wanted to use Venus Tic-Tacs ever again. That's why, when this astronaut came to me with pain in his gums and jaw and told me he'd been working on the Feng Li discovery, I was less than thrilled with what I'd find. There'd been a 6-year moratorium on Venus Tic-Tac human experimentation since the Jose incident. It had only been lifted a year ago. Apparently someone on the team wanted to pick up right where they'd left off. While I talked to the astronaut, he informed me that there'd been new research on the Tic-Tacs. I frowned and told him I wasn't aware of anything new. He filled me in. Apparently, there'd been some civilian advances in stem cell technology that ended up contributing to our own knowledge of the science. New experiments were drawn up, plausibility was determined, and one of the team leaders impressed the brass at the NASA's ethics division. That, combined with the limited number of Venus Tic-Tacs that had been recovered, and the uncertainty surrounding how much longer they'd live, ended the moratorium. That was all well and good. At the point, I still hadn't looked inside the astronaut's mouth. Before we'd started chatting, I had my assistant do some x-rays of his jaw. They'd developed while we talked, then they were ready. I'm going to digress for a second. Have you ever seen what a child's skull looks like before their adult teeth come in? It's unsettling. That was all of us at one point. You should look it up. I've been a dentist for the past 36 years. I've dealt with a lot of crazy stuff, but just thinking about all those holes makes me uneasy. Some things just stick with you, I guess. You might be thinking to yourself, why mention this? Well, this astronaut, this grown man, had what looked like new teeth forming above his adult ones. I consulted with the x-rays we took before his mission. There was nothing unusual about them. Just the filled cavities and mild bone loss in his jaw that had made him a test candidate for the Tic-Tac cells. Now, as I stared at the new x-ray, I saw the cavities were still there. The jaw was still decaying, but those dark smudges on the x-ray indicated new teeth deep in there. I had never seen anything like it. I remained professional. I asked him to lean back and open his mouth so I could begin the examination. As soon as I took my first look, I knew something was dreadfully wrong. His gums were puffy and bled at the slightest touch. His teeth looked gray, as if they'd never been brushed. It didn't make any sense. I swung the magnifying glass over the brightened light, and I think he heard me stifle my gasp when I looked through. His teeth were covered in infinitesimal holes. They were much smaller than the regular cavities. I looked closer. Each of the holes had a tiny pink hair sticking out of its center. I touched the tip of my instrument to one of the hairs, and it recoiled back into the tooth. At this point, I was getting quite uneasy. I asked the astronaut if what I did hurt, and he told me it did, but not overly bad. I decided to numb the gums around his top front teeth, and while I waited for the Novocaine to kick in, I studied his molars. Those had bigger holes with thicker growths. When I reached for one of them with the instrument, rather than slip back into the tooth, the hair extended about 1/4 of an inch and wrapped around the metal tip. The astronaut didn't seem to feel it. I gave the instrument a gentle tug. Nothing. I pulled harder, but still barely using any force. The molar came out. My patient gasped, and I apologized profusely. I stopped what I was doing and put the instrument and the tooth out of his line of sight. I decided to level with him. I told him there was some severe damage to his teeth, and I didn't know what it was. I said I needed to do more exploratory work, and it would be very uncomfortable. The astronaut did his best to take it in stride. He told me he knew something was very, very wrong from the moment he was brushing his teeth on the space station, and the bristles would get caught inside the holes. The thought still makes me shudder. I numbed his mouth the best I could and got to work. By the end of it, I'd accidentally caused 9 of his teeth to fall out. All that remained in their place were those bizarre pink hairs. I sent him back to base with an appointment for the next day. It was to remove the rest of his teeth. I felt terrible for the guy. I got a call in the middle of the night from the head of medicine at NASA hospital. I had to come there right away. The astronaut's roommate had called emergency services about an hour or so ago. He was in excruciating pain and bleeding from his mouth. I arrived at the hospital in 10 minutes. I expected to be able to go right into the room and see the patient, but I was stopped by security and the head of medicine. He instructed me to put on a clean room suit, and right then I knew something was terribly wrong. I donned the suit and followed the head of medicine into the 2 observation areas above a hermetically sealed operating room. I looked at one of the television screens showing the astronaut's mouth. My stomach churned. All the man's teeth had fallen out. In their place, growing out of his gaping, bloody gums, were swirling tangles of those pink hairs. I watched as a surgeon grasped one of the tangles in a pair of forceps and pulled. And pulled. One doctor held the astronaut's head while the surgeon put his weight into the effort. With the sound of a heavy piece of brush being torn from the ground, the tangles gave way. They writhed at the end of the forceps. The one still in his mouth stretched out, almost as if they were trying to take it away and bring it back. The surgeon dropped the veiny clot into a bowl, and the camera zoomed in on it. At the top of the tangle was something solid, something that I realized looked very much like one of those new teeth deep inside the astronaut's jawbone I'd seen on the X-ray that afternoon. Now, out and exposed to the light, I saw it wasn't a tooth at all. It was a brand new Venus Tictac, the first we'd ever discovered outside of Venetian meteorite. So the issue of pluripotent stem cells and whether or not they'll benefit human subject is still a mystery, and after hours of surgery, my patient is in a coma. As a human being, I write this with a heavy heart. As a scientist, however, I have some hope, maybe even a little excitement. Thanks to that poor astronaut, now we know how to breed new Venus Tic-Tacs. Perhaps someday we'll learn how to use them. This is Arnold F. of the DDS, August 4th, 1989. End of report.